Hey there, guys. Hope you are well, and welcome to another Holy Shed, where, of course, we are still preoccupied with trying to answer some of your questions. So keep them coming because I love hearing from you. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is that once an offer is made to try to answer whatever questions are put forward, there is no end to the ingenuity of people to come up with really hard questions. The good news for me, of course, is that I make no pretense to have all the answers, so no need for me to be intimidated. My response, quite simply, is here's what I think. Other answers are available, but probably not as good. Humble as heck, me. Now, last time I responded to Susanna's question about parenting, which rather wonderfully asked, help, have we theologically messed up our kids? Which was very personal, very pressing and expressive, I reckon, of what lots of us may feel. And what I have to say today will incorporate at least a further comment on that subject, though this may not be obvious when I tell you that I have a little bundle of questions connected to what theologians call eschatology. In other words, reflection on last things or the end of the world. As I mentioned a week or two ago, my Mrs. Pat asked about judgment. Will the baddies get their comeuppance? That's my words, but in the spirit of what she's asking. And John has asked about the second coming of Christ. And Kerry raised the issue of the book of Revelation, which is often seen as being all about the end of time. So, hey, maybe I'll just go and have a little lie down. Nah, I'll tell you what I think about these things and maybe some other related issues, but not all today, because first, I would like to go straight to the central question or the central issue governing all of these questions, which is who or what is God? Yeah, we're back to that old question again. I've said repeatedly, this is the biggest question in the whole of religion or theology. Theology is really Godology. Theo is God. So what kind of God do we imagine or picture or experience or attempt to relate to? Just about all of the issues surrounding faith and religion, concerning people of all faiths and none, come down to this single question. Who or what do we mean by God? It's the only question in town for me. The rest are basically peripherals, which I love, and I'll enjoy harping on about them until the cows come home. But this is by far the most consequential. What is God? So let's just park the eschatological questions for a bit, if you know what I mean, and zero in on a specific example of what I mean when I say that Godology, how we understand the nature of God, governs what we think about and how we respond to most other things, whether they're religious, theological, ethical, political, social, cultural, or relational, or whatever. The example I want to raise concerns what's nowadays called DEI. You're familiar with that, aren't you? Diversity, equality, and inclusion. It's a hot topic in America right now, especially under Donald Trump, who hates DEI. He hates diversity, equality, and inclusion. But it's also a controversial issue here in the UK and in many places around the world. Diversity, equality, and inclusion is really the undergirding principle of the United Kingdom's Equality Act, I think it's 2010, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of things like disability, gender, race, religion, belief, sexual orientation, gender reassignment. I think there are 9 of them altogether. Now, look, very little in this world is absolutely straightforward, right? There will always be debates and arguments, but I believe the principles of inclusiveness, equality, and diversity are pretty fundamental and, in essence, quite straightforward. And I, for one, I would like to live in a world that priorities these things. But you see, I do not believe in DEI, diversity, equality, and inclusion, simply because these are decent human values to live by, which they certainly are, but because I'm convinced that they reflect the character and nature of God. The God that I hear speaking through prophets like Isaiah, Amos, and Micah, who railed on the ancient Israelites for not adhering to justice in their social and political and religious life. I'm talking about the God revealed in Jesus Christ, who taught us to treat others as we wish to be treated, who saw love of God impossible without being connected to love of neighbour. So I'm not committed to diversity, equality and inclusion simply because I'm woke, which I'm very happy to say that I am, but because I believe in and seek to reverence the kind of God who prioritizes justice and fairness and kindness and love. The prophet Micah says it like it is. He says, God requires humans to act justly, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. And walking humbly with God clearly incorporates justice and kindness. God is love. Yes, you heard that first in the Bible, but it's also written in our hearts. We know that love is what it's all about. Love is foundational to everything. Love should govern the way that we live personally and also collectively in communities and society. But in the context of the things that I want to discuss, not all this week, I'd like to add that God's love is also uncontrolling. As I've said, I recently contributed to a conference with that title, The Uncontrolling Love of God. It's the name of a great book by Thomas J. Oord, who was also speaking at the conference. I think it's a wonderful thing, when someone articulates in words something that you instantly know you've believed for years, for decades, maybe for as long as you can remember. The uncontrolling love of God names something that I've known and believed in and been committed to for, certainly for 40 years or so. But I didn't name it as such until relatively recently. The thing is, love, real love, is never controlling, right? It's just not what love's about. I see it in Jesus, who, he demonstrated the uncontrolling love of God day after day after day of his life, as we read about it in the Gospels. We see it in his arrest, in his trial, and supremely in his execution, the crucifixion, which I think represents the pinnacle of uncontrolling love. See, love never imprisons, never coerces, never forces, never bullies or intimidates. To the contrary, love relinquishes power. It lets go of power. If you love somebody, let them go. Who sang that song? Was it Sting? Can't remember now, but it was right. Love relinquishes power. It empowers the other. Love liberates. It remains constant, come what may. Now, none of us can possibly live fully up to that, but it is what love means. And God is the fountainhead of this kind of love. God is love, uncontrolling love, empowering love, liberating love. Love is within everything, is everywhere, because God is in everything. God is everywhere. Now look, as parents, when our kids are small, we must exercise loving control, right? In order for them not to hurt themselves or to hurt others. They must learn to fit in, to be part of a family, a community, a society. So they can't simply behave however they wish, and it's okay. That's just common sense. But when our kids are grown up, unavoidably flexible term, by the way, but once our kids have grown up, we have to let them go, right? Allow them to be themselves and not mere echoes of us. We can't live our kids' lives for them. I sometimes have wished that I could. We can support them, yes, offer advice if they wish to hear it, but we have to relinquish control, which of course underlies what I was saying last time in response to Suzanne. Love cannot be controlling. And I quoted that poem by Khalil Gibran, which speaks of children and says, we may give them our love, but not our thoughts. And God does not seek to control us as human beings, or indeed the rest of creation. We may sometimes wish rather that it were so, that God did do that God would swoop in like Superman and control everything. But that's not how it is. We as human beings and the whole of creation has this essential quality or capacity of freedom. Just like we as parents cannot ultimately control our kids, and those who do exert that kind of control mostly lose the hearts of their kids in the process. So we can't ultimately control our kids. So also God does not impose anything upon us. God cannot control and still be God, because love cannot control and still be love. So there are things that God can't do. And isn't this precisely what we learn from the parable of the prodigal son? I mean, why did the father allow his son to go? Why did he grant him his inheritance and send him off on his merry way? Well, the answer is because the son wasn't a child and needed to live his own life. And then, interestingly, the story as it goes on reveals that perhaps the son hadn't ever properly understood the uncontrolling love of his father. When he despaired of the mess that he'd made of his life, he decided to return and face the music, not realizing that music would be the music of rejoicing and not that of thunderous judgment, which he kind of feared. Maybe the parable could have been named The Uncontrolling Love of a Parent, which we generally take to be representative of the love of God, right? And if this story is meant to tell us something about God, I think it tells us something very radical. That God refuses to control, even if that were possible. It also tells us that God has feelings, that God experiences concern, is affected by our mistakes and by our pain, that God cannot guarantee the outcome. The son may never have returned, but the father still let him go. And so God experiences relief and joy and love, but not control. This God stands in stark contrast to the God of what's called classical theism. That's the notion of God which has dominated much of Christendom, certainly from the time of Augustine. The classical theistic vision of God, that, as I say, still prevails in Christian doctrine, even if people wander from it in practice. The vision of God is that of a God who is utterly transcendent. In other words, radically above, outside of, distinct and independent of the world. It's a vision of a God who's also immutable, which means unchangeable. Also of a God who is impassible, doesn't experience passion. Sorry for all these big words, but impassible means, in other words, that God can't be subject to or experience pain or suffering or experience changes of mood. God is beyond all of these things. God's above feelings and emotions, as well as agony or suffering. According to classical theism, God is also timeless, exists outside of time, and is omnipotent or all-powerful. And yet I could go on. There's all these kind of statements. The fact is, most of the tenets of classical theism are not stated in the Bible, right? And indeed, some of them, I think, just don't align with the biblical text, in which, for example, God is portrayed as feeling joy or sadness or anger or regret. Remember that regret, even at creating the world in the first place. It says God regretted it. God experiences mind changes prompted by, people like Abraham and Moses. In essence, classical theism, as defined by people like Augustine and later Aquinas, posits a God who sounds to me much more like a God of Greek imagination than the God of the Hebrew people, or indeed the God of Jesus. So look, for me, love is not simply one attribute of God among many others. It is the essence of who God is. God is love. And love is not abstract or theoretical or impersonal, but deeply practical, relational, and engaged. And what I sense from the overall flow of Scripture and from Jesus in particular is that God does not sit on a cloud, as it were, outside or above this messy world of human experience dispensing love. No, but God resides in the very substance of this world, deeply related to and involved with its joys and sufferings. Of course, by love, we're not talking about something pink and fluffy. Love is, as I say, profoundly engaged and practical, sometimes taking the form of comfort or affirmation and healing, sometimes challenging or confronting, but always seeking justice. I believe, what doesn't change about God is God's essence or essential character, of eternal, steadfast, unwavering love. And in that sense, God is immutable or unchanging. But what God experiences in this relationality, in deep relationship with the world, with you and me, is shaped by that relationship, or it isn't really a relationship. As, for example, the people in Gaza suffer unutterable agony, or as creation itself groans from human-induced climate change. In these things and many others, God is part of all of that experience. God suffers with those people in Gaza and elsewhere. God suffers in the extinction of species, in the pollution of the world, and the seas, and the changing of the climate, and also as we rejoice and evolve, I think God rejoices and evolves with us. God is enriched or wounded by what happens in time, right? In the world, in us, in all that is going on round about us. So I believe in a deeply relational theology. And I think that's what you find in most of the Bible. And in this world of creation and human reality, rather than intervening, therefore, from some outside vantage point, a throne in the heavens, God not intervenes, but interacts from within. And as we saw a couple of weeks ago in Romans 8:28, in everything, God works for good in the world with us, not for us, but with us. So the world's goodness is increased. The goodness of God in the world is increased. Not by a God who's up there sort of pulling a few levers and pressing a few buttons, but by a God who's utterly involved and working with us, and we are part of that work of God in the evolution or betterment of our world. Now, this vision of God, the God who is love, constantly interacting with the world, working with those who love God's ways, joining together with their power and creativity to help direct events in the direction of God's will and purpose, is very, very different to the God of classical theism, the classical notion of this detached, impassive, all-powerful deity ordering events from elsewhere. So much of the thinking behind classical theism is in fact influenced by Greek thought and by the Greek notions of perfection. And for God to be perfect, then God cannot be involved with this, with the messiness of our mess and all the rest of it. God has to be outside. And yet the whole life and message of Jesus is utterly contrary to that, just as actually quite a lot of the Hebrew scriptures is contrary to that. God is love, a love which doesn't control, that lures, inspires, strengthens, supports, and empowers us to be the best that we can be, to be part of the great tidal currents of the Spirit of God in the world. What has all this to do with eschatology, with the second coming, with divine judgment, the book of Revelation, and all that? Well, you're going to have to wait to see that. But this, I think, is important because behind all of those things is the pressing question, but hang on, who are we dealing with? Who is God? What is God? But for now, I think, there's plenty to ponder there, isn't there? And please don't feel that you have to agree with everything I say, but please just give it some space in your thinking, because you never know. I might just have a point. If you have any other questions or comments, please message me or email me on davetomlinson@mac.com, or just post it on Facebook and I'll see what I can do. And if you want to pursue some of these things in a little bit more sort of an in-depth way, then I'd love it if you could join me at the retreat that I'm leading in Amadown Retreat Centre in September. It's going to be a great time in a beautiful place, by the way. So if you can be there, I would love that, and we'll have some fun together. And I wonder if you can help to spread the news that the Holy Shed is now available as an audio-only podcast. Every week it's available on Spotify, on the SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts. And the post is always put up on Tuesdays, right? Not on Sundays like this one, but on Tuesdays. So if you can get the word out about that, because I know a lot of people want to, listen to the Holy Shed, but they can't sit down and look at it on the screen. They want to hear it while they're doing their jog or sitting on the train or the bus or the tube, or just getting on with their business, the ironing or whatever men get up to these days, So there you go. Meanwhile, here is a prayer about a God I can believe in. I don't believe in a man in the sky, big brother listening in on every conversation, looking down on our follies, keeping count of gaffes, faults and stupidities. I don't believe in religious elitism. It's our way or be damned. I don't believe in biblical put-downs or final claims to truth. I don't believe in proofs of God's existence, mind games, claiming certitude in the face of unfathomable mystery. I believe in provisionality, efforts at truth, shuffling metaphors and symbols that make no claim to certitude, but disclose windows for imagination and possibility. I believe in genuflecting when passing majestic trees, or witnessing a sunset over the ponds and the roosting ducks on Clapham Common. I believe that every time we breathe fresh air, we inhale the Spirit, that every plot of earth is sacred, every broken heart is held, that each and every hope is a smile on the face of God. I believe in kindness towards strangers, offering a sign of peace to enemies, sharing bread and wine with those whose vision of the world leaves me baffled. I believe in a God who plays with puppies, sings in the darkness with nightingales, lies on sick beds with the weak and suffering, weeps with every grieving heart. I believe in this God, not a bloke in the sky, this God. Amen. So, my lovelies, if you've got something to hand to do a toast with, I've still got some tea left here, but whatever you've got to hand, I propose that you join me. I propose a toast to uncontrolling love. May we all learn to practice and receive such love. I propose a toast to living in freedom and learning to use our freedom well. A toast to everyone who's ever loved us without trying to control us. To life and love. L'chaim. And by the way, why not take a minute when you can to just pause and think about the people who've loved you without trying to control you, and be grateful for them. It's a great thing. So if you like what I'm doing here in the Holy Shed, you can buy me a coffee. You just have to follow the link to my coffee site, and we're so grateful to all those of you who do this and encourage us in other ways too. Thank you very much indeed. Just two little things. There are 2 soul spaces, not one, but 2 soul spaces this week. On Tuesday at 7 o'clock, along with the guys from the Oasis Church Social Club in Croydon, we're going to have a soul space themed on Only Love is Real. I think you can get the hang that that's a little bit along the lines of what we've been thinking about. So it'd be great if you can join me for that. The other one is on Wednesday, courtesy of St. Athelberger's. I did this soul space, or one very like it, a few weeks back, a couple of months back now. But this one here with Athelberger's is especially focused on it being Climate Change Week, or Climate Week this week. And so we'll be thinking about this little planet, this beautiful, gorgeous planet, and, hopefully how we can care for it a little better. Some lovely music and films and stories and poems and things in both of these soul spaces. So that one's at 12:30, the other one's at 7 o'clock. Join me if you can, and that is just about it. It's lovely to have you here in the Holy Shed, and I hope you've enjoyed what we've talked about and found it helpful. And we'll carry on next week, and we'll get to those difficult questions about eschatology. And hope you can join me for that. So have a great week. Go well. Keep loving the world around you. Keep being kind, and be kind to yourselves. Stay human. I'll see you soon. Bye.